Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and today we have Daniel Suarez, the best-selling author of Demon, Freedom, Influx, and my all-time favorite, Kill Decision. It's the most technically accurate book I've read about swarms of drones and how we think about them over in robotics. His new book, Delta V, goes in a different direction, arguing that robots plus humans would be much more effective for the colonization of space than just relying on autonomous robots. Daniel, thank you very much for being here with us. Can you summarize?
Oh, thanks for having me.
Can you summarize Kill Decision for our listeners?
Sure. Kill Decision is a techno thriller that's about autonomous drones of unknown origin conducting targeted assassinations in the United States. And it is told through a protagonist, a female scientist, who studies algorithms are basically stolen and used to power these swarming weapons. So she's pulled into that world.
It's a great novel. First off, women scientists, yay team. Like to see that in techno thrillers. And also one of the things is that was written in 2018, and I didn't read it in 11, and I didn't read it in last year in 2018. And it opens with a bunch of Silicon Valley bros getting taken out by their own technology. And I think maybe in 2011, I was supposed to kind of shed a tear. And I was like, yeah, go team. So.
Yeah, I guess that perceptions have changed. Actually, the book starts out, you're right, there is a scene like that in the book. But the Kill Decision starts out actually with a drone attack on Middle Eastern shrines. So it's a little prescient, not an oil refinery, but in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I really like the book. I want to see why you got into swarms, and in particular weaver ants, because we've seen those attacks on the Saudi Arabian oil facilities, but those were just 10 drones acting independently, like 10 inexpensive cruise missiles. So why'd you get into swarms?
Well, my work on Kill Decision, the idea behind the book stemmed out of my first two books, which was Demon and Freedom TM. And those books were about cyber war, if you will. And that was a scalable type of digital war that individuals could really conduct. And what I noticed while I was doing research for those books was that in Washington, Pentagon officials had started discussing a term, lethal autonomy, which was about whether or not it was ethical to give robotic weapons the algorithmic ability to decide whether to kill a human being, which I thought was that interested me because the scalability of cyber war combined with kinetic war, that is robots, I thought was particularly revolutionary and frightening. And so that immediately became a subject of interest for me for a book.
Yeah, there is so much to be thinking about the lethal autonomous weapons. I think one of the things, and I liked so much about Kill Decision, was the idea that it was cheap, the Ewok level of state actors, the technology. I come from the behavioral robotics tradition, so we've always used animal intelligence, insect intelligence to emulate. And what it takes, what we believe we could do with $1,000 drone. I think the ones that they were using in Saudi Arabia were on the order of $20,000, $30,000. But this is a huge game changer, I think. So I work a lot with the $1,000 quadcopters. And we do some fixed wings, but they don't go 200-mile distance either. One of the things was that in Kill Decision, they had really interesting sensors, chemical detection sensors, and they had more robust computer vision algorithms than we're seeing actually come out now. What do you think? Do you think the drones, based on your research, are going to be feasible in the next 10 years to do any of these types of things that you had in Kill Decision?
Well, the technology that I used in Kill Decision actually does exist. Whether or not it is functional in the field and economical and all of those things, that is, but I definitely think cheap, disposable drone weapons are a factor we're going to increasingly have to deal with. In the case of Kill Decision, there are scenes where we have quadcopter drones that are using various sensors or electronic noses based on human trying to detect the unique chemical signature exhaled from human breath. They have a 25-cent chip for that's typically used in a camera for facial detection. And so they have a tiny weapon, zip gun, that's very cheap, very light, and they're looking for people's faces. They're trying to find their breath to zero in on them. So in that sense, it's like pheromones, where they're looking for that increasing signal concentration of the human breath and honing in. Just described is a very simple thing. It isn't typically combined to do this, but I wanted to explore what the possibilities were technologically. So that they used in that book was real, not commonly or not used in warfare now, but I wanted to give people a heads up that this was eminently possible.
Yeah, we've looked at, the computer vision, definitely. The chemical sensors have been a problem. I mean, we've looked at doing something similar to detect if you find somebody in search and rescue and their back is presented to you, you can't tell if they're dead or alive. And you've got to, and the protocol is if you can't tell they're alive, you must assume they're dead because there may be lots of other people to rescue. You can't spend 8 hours extracting there. So that one I haven't seen.
Yeah.
One thing that I did want to ask about, I'm pretty familiar, as you know, with drones. And we've looked like there's just recently.
Yes, you are.
A nail gun, right? Where did the idea of drones taking their buzzsaws and cutting holes in ships come from? That was pretty cool.
Well, a lot of that came out of the research. The form factor, the change in size within a given species from various roles within a colony, for instance, with certain species can be 100 or 500 times larger than the tiny worker ants or other ants. So in other words, their customization, if you will, and the way they're raised and what they're fed can change their morphology. And what occurred to me is if you were starting to power robots using swarm, say, eusocial insect algorithms, their mandibles and how they act, they can just be hooked to a different machine, in this case, a plasma cutter. And the idea is if you have leaf cutter ants, well, the robots can be essentially instructed that the ship is a leaf and their plasma torches their mandibles, and you can use their existing behavior as your entire model for how to conduct cutting up this ship.
I like that in a scary, bad way. Good idea there. And so that turns the table a little bit. In your 2013 TED Talk called "The Kill Decision Shouldn't Belong to a Robot," you mentioned that the best defense against a lethal autonomous weapon is not to respond with your own lethal autonomous weapons, but to respond like an immune system. But you didn't elaborate, so you can talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. My thinking there stems from the idea, the commonly held idea, I think for many people, that robotic weapons are a great way to save our soldiers' lives. And I understand the impetus, the desire for that to be true. What I wanted to explore in my TED Talk was the second and third order effects of us rolling out autonomous robotic weapons. And I don't believe that they will save our soldiers' lives, because that assumption is predicated upon having these weapons. If other countries and individual groups have these weapons, then it's not going to be saving anybody's lives. We're instead going to be... A lot of people feel that being part of an advanced society will be better able to use them. But in truth, our society creates so much tracking data for individuals that I think people in the modern world are more susceptible to these drones than people in, let's say, a less technical society might be. I mean, we have in our pocket devices that track everything we do, where we are. There are facial detection cameras, there's license plate readers. All of these things can feed into targeting systems. And we've seen that this data is routinely spilled or, let's say, unknown entities anywhere in the world can track down individuals and use these types of weapons to lash out at them. So a dictator far away in the world trying to get at activists who might be, let's say, in the West, criticizing them. They could lash out with plausible deniability. And that's the other part, that autonomous weapons really make attribution very difficult. And that changes war. And it makes war much more likely.
Yep.
So I was thinking, rather than build these weapons ourselves, which would radically alter our society, which would concentrate a lot of power into unseen, unaccountable hands, and that's not good for democracy. Instead, what we would do is we'd create drones that don't attack. They're not autonomous killer weapons, but maybe intercede when a drone, an illicit drone, comes in from the outside. They either net them, or we use other non-violent systems to harness them and take them away. That's why I read about this morning, is it's a microwave beam that essentially fries the circuits of swarming drones. And notice that downtown area, you could have it protected sort of as an immune system. It responds to these incoming drones, takes them out, ushers them away, but we don't build any killer weapons ourselves.
Yeah, I looked at that and said, oh, that gave me a lot of ideas about the immune system, thinking about how epidemics are handled and how it's, a lot of it is you see something new, you monitor it, you kind of write off the first few instances lost causes, all you're getting in data, but you're immediately coming up with countermeasures like a vaccine, and then you kind of come up with a general class of vaccines that'll take more than just the one thing you saw, because you know it's going to mutate. And so that rapid detection counter in there, I think, is there. So interesting. Well, let me change the subject a bit. Kill Decision was about autonomous robots, and that's what we would in AI call a taskable agent. You tell the robot what to do, it goes off and does its task, and it comes back and it tells you when it's done. And theoretically, you're being horribly productive or having a latte. In your latest novel, Delta V, you are, I guess, rather Nathan Joyce makes the argument that that's not going to work for space colonization. So tell us a little bit about Delta V.
Sure. Delta V is a very well-researched, authentic story about the first commercial asteroid mining expedition. This fascinates me for a number of reasons. I think it's going to involve a lot of important technology that is being invented right now. I did a lot of research for the book. And one of the things that I quickly realized in talking to NASA scientists and space entrepreneurs and astronauts is that robotics is immensely useful in space, but is increasingly the opinion that making rapid progress in space, particularly in something like lunar mining or building colonies in space using in situ resources, we know so little about the nature of the environments that we're going to be in, that sending out a robot that has been carefully designed with certain assumptions, and it might really be the slow way to go about it, because it might take 2 years for that robot to, let's say, reach an asteroid on a very low delta V or low energy orbit or trajectory. And if you get there and the conditions are not to expect, then that entire mission is a scrub. It's a failure. But if you bring people along on the mission, so that's robots and humans work, and you can basically accelerate the failure cycle. You don't have to wait to send another mission. The people can modify the robots, change the firmware, and then roll it out again and see how it works. And you can rapidly accelerate things. Now, the robots are still very important because, of course, the radiation environment of deep space is very dangerous to humans. So I think telepresence, that is telerobotics, as well as autonomous systems that operate but under close human supervision nearby, I think that's going to be the winning strategy.
Yeah, I think the local teleoperation makes sense. Certainly the autonomy, what you just described is a great example of the open world. The fact that we, in AI, we typically work in open worlds, whereas control engineers work in closed world, where everything is modeled or known. And the open world is much harder because it's like, yeah, you may know some stuff, but there's a lot you may not know, and you wouldn't know it. How would you even know what you don't know when you encounter it? It's like, insects don't understand people. It's just an obstacle, a predator. So we're going to have to wrap this up. I'm sad. It was really good talking with you. A totally crazy question. I've seen your work classified as science fiction, but also as a techno-thriller. So what's the difference between those two labels, or is there?
Well, there is a difference. I guess it depends on whom you ask. For me, a techno-thriller is generally something that takes place in the present day as a heavy technical component. And of course, it's a thriller. And sci-fi has traditionally, at least in my interpretation, taken place quite a bit, 100 or more years in the future. At least that's the way I think it was traditionally viewed. My work tends to, if we have a Venn diagram, there tends to be a good deal of crossover between those two categories of work. And I think that's partly because we're living in some ways in a science fiction reality right now. I mean, let's face it, we have devices that allow us to broadcast our images across the entire world. Reusable rockets are flying and they're a real thing. So that's very sci-fi stuff. And so when I write about these things, I'm writing about the near future, and it just seems like it's science fiction. My first 4 books, my first occurred in the present day, and yet they were referred to by reviewers and people in the media as sci-fi books, and Demon in particular. And I kind of chuckled about that, thinking, well, I think folks are in for a surprise because it isn't going to be sci-fi for long, if it is sci-fi. And so I straddle those two, we can call them genres, because I think they're starting to meld into each other. And maybe that's because we're really living in a sci-fi future for ourselves right now.
Yeah, good point. You know, one thing that makes your work different from other techno-thriller authors like Michael Crichton or even Tom Clancy is that there's a strong industrial military complex shadow government kind of theme going through there. Is that just for fun, like in the X-Files where you had the whole, conspiracy vibe, or do you see this as a real problem?
I use it to varying degrees in my story. Influx comes to mind, which is that to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And that story in particular, for your listeners who aren't aware of it, that is a story that is about a rogue government agency that actually has access to much more advanced technology, and people don't really know about it. That's more done metaphorically. What I was trying to get at there in that story was unaccountable concentrations of power, essentially. And of course, this really is a theme that runs through a lot of my work, how technology is how it changes the social dynamic. It changes the concentration of power, and it's a constant moving trend. Technology, it sometimes democratizes power, sometimes it concentrates it, and it's that movement of that needle that fascinates me. And so that's very often personified by that military-industrial complex shadow government. There's always that impulse for control and always the impulse to take back control at the individual level. And I think that gets to the heart of a lot of what people are experiencing with technology today. I think human agency, let's call it, in the face of increasing technological power. I do think it's an essential question, and one that I constantly examine in my books.
Well, cool. So what's your next book going to be about? And will there be robots in them?
Oh, there definitely will be robots. It is the sequel to Delta V. I wanted to do these asteroid mining books as a series because I think it's a critically important subject, how we deal with expanding human civilization to become a celestial civilization, how we overcome our national and other divisions, and how we secure sustainable energy basically for a very bright and positive future. That interests me, and I want to make these books as realistic as possible. So yeah, that's what I'm working on next. And yes, robots will help us do that.
Yay, robots. So speaking of robots, what's your favorite robot, real or fictional, excluding the swarms and kill decision?
Okay, I would say in the movie Interstellar, I don't know what the robots were called, but those blocky robots that they had,
yeah.
I loved them. They were a very very counterintuitive form factor. They were immensely versatile. And of course, I love the personality of the robot too.
Yeah, that was very good. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for being with us today. And I am so glad you're writing.
It was fun.
Great. And I'm so glad you're writing more books with robots in them. So to everybody else,
I can't help it.
Yeah. And you shouldn't. Keep on. So to everybody else, if you want to learn more about real robots, check out my book, Robotics Through Science Fiction, Artificial Intelligence Explained Through 6 Classic Robot Stories. And there's the second edition of my textbook, Introduction to AI Robotics. And please do remember to subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel so you won't miss a thing.